For a lot of women leaders from Europe to the Americas to Africa, it's unfortunate. Some man thinks that you should not be leading. In varying degrees, they don't think you should. For many years, they said to women that you can be seen but not heard, right? So women would look beautiful, show up, but don't speak. So you question whether you have what it takes to be there. I'm at the table, but am I supposed to be here? Do I deserve to be here? Do I have what it takes to be here? It's one thing for the people to have bias against you, but it's another thing for you to internalize it. When you let your light shine, you give others permission to do the same. I think the role model piece is a big deal. Oprah had a huge influence on me, even though she doesn't know me. There was just something beautiful and magical about what she did through talk. If you can see it, you can be it.
It is time to reimagine leadership. My name is Ben Owden, and I would like to welcome you to a series of conversations in partnership with Women Lift Health around how can we develop new approaches to the new challenges that leaders face in the 21st century. Greetings to you. I hope you are at peace and are having a meaningful and productive day. Welcome to another episode of the Why Lead podcast. I'm your host, Ben Owden. Now, we're still having a series of conversation around the theme of reimagining leadership. As the world is progressing and things are changing, we're experiencing new challenges in leadership. And so how can we begin to think about new approaches to address those new challenges? And in our conversation today, we will be exploring the power of transformative outcomes that can and have been achieved when women take the lead. And so to have this conversation, I am joined by the founder of Women in Leadership Advancement Network, where she is working to inspire a shift to gender-balanced leadership across all levels. She's a tri-sector leader with over 20 years of experience across the nonprofit, private, and public sectors. She has managed programs focusing on improving the health, education, and economic outcomes in over 30 Nigerian states and 5 Western African cities. Ladies and gentlemen, Abosede George-Ogan.
Wow.
Karibu.
Asante sana. Lovely. Thank you so much. It's really good to be here, Ben.
I think my first question would be in running, Women in Leadership Advancement Network and working with women and helping them sort of thrive and elevate in leadership roles where they are. What are some of the, decisions or things that women can do or have done that catapulted them from just being ordinary leaders to being extraordinary leaders?
Thank you so much for that question. So I think that's a really, if I'm being honest, until you asked that question, I've never really thought about that specific question. But just as I heard you say it, I think the fact that there was so much resistance, right, to women becoming leaders definitely played a role in sort of honing what has then sort of started to be defined as the type of leadership that women bring, right? And so what I mean by that is oftentimes when you want to define a woman, the characteristics like she's emotional, right? She's, we feel more comfortable saying
sometimes
things.
Difficult.
Yeah, sometimes difficult, right? But then we say things like, oh, she's a carer, she's a nurturer, but she's not a leader, right? And I think women have had a lot of time to sort of introspect about who am I and what do I bring to the table, right? And I think that there's something unconsciously in that. And then, of course, the fact that women were conditioned to play that carer, nurturer role, which oftentimes is like, what's in your toolkit to play those roles, right? And so what's in your toolkit is that multitasking that we know about. It's that you're definitely, because you're nurturing and caring for children, you're in touch with your emotional side. So I think we spend so much time understanding who we are and what we bring to the table that when we eventually arrived there, it was very clear what our value proposition was, especially because there had been so much resistance. It's like, And then you're watching what's currently manifesting, because all of us, what we know as leadership is male leadership, right? Because that's what we've mostly seen, right? And so you're able to identify the difference, right? Of what does it mean to lead in this way versus that way? Because what the evidence shows us is we're a different type of leaders, right? In some situations, we might lead better because those characteristics are sort of what you need in that situation. So if you think about are required in that situation, and that's the COVID story, right? So there was empathy was needed, listening, active listening was needed. And then the female leaders just were in a position to really benefit from the science to be able to act faster, for example. So again, in response to that question, it's just the fact that I think women have brought their authentic selves, right? And that's why oftentimes we associate female leadership to authentic leadership and this ability to lead with heart, right? And with empathy.
And that's an interesting take and response, because I think I agree with you in terms of women have played this nurturing role for a very long time.
Yeah.
But actually, a big part of leadership is growing your team.
Absolutely.
Is unleashing the potential of those you lead.
That's
something
right.
that is very natural for women, right?
Exactly.
And I think there's a book by Frederic Laloux, and he basically captures the history of leadership, documented leadership from recorded history. So he goes back to, the times people were hunter-gatherers. And you see that strongman approach to leadership was necessary when the world was volatile, where people weren't in alignment. There weren't rules to govern us. Everyone decides what they want to do.
Right.
But as the world became more ordered, it became unnecessary.
Got it.
And I think with now where the world is heading, even with new generations entering the workforce, people are requiring hybrid type of work.
Yeah.
People require more freedom to exercise self-leadership and to decide how they want to work. And I think as the evolution continues, it seems like women leaders will thrive more.
Absolutely.
Because that nurturing, that compassion, that empathy piece to it becomes more relevant.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you when you said that. Now, success stories in leadership generally and in life are very important as in sort of inspiring and giving people references and stories that they can resonate with. And I think representation is a big piece. That's why we're talking about diversity, because when you see someone who looks like you, sounds like you, sometimes it gives you that confidence that I can also get to that point. And so in your own life, what are some of the stories and the people that maybe you had access to or you came across that gave you that reference to say, I too can do it?
Right. So, first role models that I ever had were my parents. My siblings and I say that service is in our DNA. And really, it's because both my parents were public servants, right? And my dad was in the military. And I just have a vivid picture of him waking up every morning and wearing the same uniform. The commitment is huge, right? Where you wear the same thing for 35 years of your life, right? And so it demonstrated to me this sense of service and duty, right? And then my mom was a teacher. And my mom has, it's so interesting because my mom would come home with a student from school. We went to the same schools that she taught at. And then she'll come home with this child that is a very stubborn student. And she'll say, this is your new brother or something like that. So it turned out, right? I was too young to understand, but, much later I got it. It turned out that parents who had difficult children would send the children to my mother, right? And she adopted them. You know what I mean by adopted? Yeah. She would care for them. She would talk to them. She would discipline them. She just felt like she had it in her to be able to take that child from, these points to the other points where they obviously would be of better, behavior or character. And so that's what I saw growing up, right? This sense of service. So I think definitely my parents were my first role models. And, I tell the story of the fact that when I then turned 16, don't ask me where I got it from. I said I wanted to make a difference and change the world. And I always say that now that I'm older, I always say that nobody laughed. Nobody mocked me. And there was something about that really gave me the audacity to believe that it was possible. And so I went on this path where I was then seeking for how to make a difference and change the world. And so again, in terms of what do you study, right? My parents didn't force me, right, to study what they wanted me to study. Because if they did, I would probably have studied law, but I ended up studying political science. And then when I graduated, it was like, what is a good job, right? And someone told me about this organization called Action Aid International that had a vision of a world without poverty and had a mission to eradicate the inequities and injustices that cause poverty. And I was like, that is an organization that aligns with my values, right? And it sounded like they were making a difference and changing the world. And so I'm like, I want to work in that organization. And so my journey has just been laced with what I describe as allies, right? Because I had this sort of clarity of purpose, I have then journeyed on this path where I've now discovered people. So Oprah had a huge influence on me, even though she doesn't know me. There was just something beautiful and magical about what she did through talk, right? I saw people's faces light up. I saw her ability to connect with humans. And so Oprah, through just by proxy, played a huge role in terms of how I saw the ability for you to use communication to bring about change. And so my first master's is in communication for social change, right? So communication for development. And so that was another person. And then I think it was difficult because as I started to get older, my understanding of how I then make that change was very much tied to what I was seeing around me growing up in Nigeria. And I really wanted to change these many lives around me. And so political office became of interest. And unfortunately, there are just not as many role models. Nigeria has never had an elected female president. It has never had an elected female governor in its 36 states. As we speak, there are only 4 women of 109 senators, 15 out of 360 House of Representative members. So we're averaging somewhere around 4.1% in terms of women's representation. And, it kind of mirrors across board, right? So in that light, I haven't seen, and to your point, right? Helen Clark said it yesterday. She was like, if you can see it, you can be it, right? And so Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was another person that, is dear to my heart because she was the first person on the continent that became a female president, right? And so again, it's possible. And then there are just other people in different spaces who, I think the role model piece is a big deal. If you see that people have done it, it just gives you this audacity. One of my favorite quotes, poems, whatever it is Marianne Williamson's Our Deepest Fear. And the line where she says, when you let your light shine, you give others permission to do the same. I love it. And I do agree because for everyone who has let their light shine, they have given me audacity, and this sort of varies. But we're still trusting for the female president.
Yeah. One day. I'm glad as Tanzania.
Sooner.
As Tanzania, we are there.
Yes.
We currently have our first female president.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
And it's beautiful to see. And you can see little girls looking up and saying,
it's possible.
I too can be. So
that's something I can aspire to. Yes.
Exactly. And I love what you shared there. And I think you're talking about your context and how there weren't many examples on a macro level. At home, of course, you had examples within your family and your parents. But on a macro level as a country, there weren't many examples of who you aspired to be. But that didn't stop you. You went outside of your borders,
That's
right? And there's this statement that I personally love. And it's something that my own mother instilled in me early on in my life, right?
you are the story you tell yourself.
That's right.
It's not the story people tell of you. It's not the story people tell you. But you are the story you tell
That's
yourself.
so powerful.
And so, true or not, but you are the story. So if the story you tell yourself is a story of victimhood, then that's what's going to happen, right? And I think, unfortunately, we live in a world where many societies already have set narratives around who women are and what they can do and what they can achieve. And as a result of that, there are a lot of women who tell themselves stories that are getting in their own way to advance their own life and careers. And so what are some, I guess, limiting beliefs that in your experience working with women and working to advance women, you've come across that you feel like if more women are able to unlearn these self-limiting beliefs, then that journey towards their destiny, their purpose, would be much easier.
Right. So, I mean, I agree with you, by the way, and this is what we call internalized biases, right? So it's one thing for the people to have bias against you, but it's another thing for you to internalize it. So I think confidence is a huge one, right? This idea that for many years they said to women that you can be seen but not heard, right? And it then became what it was, right? So women would look beautiful, show up, but don't speak, right? And there's it can only happen so long where you're supposed to be this person who shows up, but not supposed to speak. And if that's learned behavior, and so before you know it, you're not speaking, you don't have a voice, right? So what we start to talk about around voice and agency, because your opinion doesn't matter. Nobody's asking you what you think. Your perspective is not needed. And so that's something that for generations, right, we internalized. And for many people, they saw like their grandmas, right? So in my case, it would have been my grandma. I guess it started to shift in my mother's generation, all right? And then, of course, you know what is happening now. But I think I definitely saw like my grandma was, mainly a homemaker, if I'm being honest. And, I didn't see her in the context of her family life because she lived with us growing up. But really, she was more of a mother to my mom, if you know what I mean, like a role model to my mom in how she takes care of her family. Like that was a major contribution. Do you know what I mean? She wasn't sort of advising my mom on her career or things like that because that wasn't her reality. So I think this confidence piece where women then internalized, I'm not supposed to speak. My voice doesn't matter. Has affected us in variety of ways where even when women show up, they kind of cringe, right? And that's the idea of the imposter syndrome, right? So where it's like, I'm at the table, but am I supposed to be here? Do I deserve to be here? Do I have what it takes to be here? Because oftentimes around that table is either only your male counterparts or you've only seen men on those tables. So you question whether you have what it takes to be there. So there's that.
So, and how do we change that? But specifically, imposter syndrome. I once did a talk. I was invited to a women's event, and I talked about how, I guess for me, I transitioned from having the imposter syndrome to having a belonging syndrome, where I'm like, I belong here. Whether or not the rest of you agree with me, but if I'm here, then I belong here, right? So as a woman who's clearly very confident in your own right, and you've been able to be successful in your career, how does one transition from having the imposter syndrome to getting to that place of belonging, where if you have a seat on the table, I belong here?
Yeah. I think it goes back to what your mama taught you. I mean, really, we must thank her because it's that voice.
Yes.
It definitely starts with what you tell yourself. And that's where we now have tools, right? It's that daily confession. It's looking yourself in the mirror and saying, Bossa, you belong here. You are here and you deserve to be here. right? Because if nobody's going to tell you that, then you're going to tell yourself that. So I think it's really the self-talk. But again, let's layer it with the tool for someone who's listening and saying, how do I really actively do that? So daily confessions work, right? Looking at yourself in the mirror, so I'll tell you real life, an example. I told myself today, I was like, this is the body you have. And by the way, God bless her. It's my Tanzanian friend that taught me this. She's my classmate a few years ago. And she taught me this thing about being thankful for your body. She's like, for those of us who are like always trying to lose weight, she's like, but Bossa, this is the body that you have today. And it's helping, like this body is the container that is helping you be this person, right? So it brought me here today. It's the reason I'm sitting here with you. Do you know what I mean? So I think gratitude. And when the Bible says like count your blessings, it's like, what do you have now? What do you have in your hands, right? Because I think the interesting thing about imposter syndrome is this idea that you magnify the negative and minimize
the positive.
That's right. And so how do you flip that, right? And focus on, even if it's the one thing, right?
I will hype up the one thing.
That's right. And you show up with that one thing. And then tomorrow is another day. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's definitely, so there's a lot of self-talk that I think plays a role in getting you from that point of imposter syndrome to the other side.
Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever done that, but I will. It's a very powerful example you've just given. I'm grateful for my body, right? Yeah. Something that we rarely think about. When we pay attention, when it's breaking down. But,
exactly.
But when it's working,
when it's functioning,
it's something that we tend to overlook. And I think when you have that frame of mind, you realize that you probably have more than enough every single day to show up and be successful in what you do. Now, as we're winding down our conversation, in what ways does resilience and adaptability play a critical role, especially in advancing women leadership, and particularly in healthcare? Because the world is changing. Yeah. There are a lot of emerging technologies and things that are affecting how healthcare is going to look like. And I personally believe that it's a space and a field and an industry where women thrive and women should continue to thrive, and particularly in leadership roles. So how does resilience and adaptability, especially in this pursuit of equity and inclusion, play, especially for those who are already in that room, who already have a seat on the table?
Yeah. So, we're talking a lot about transformational leadership, and of course, even the theme of the conference, reimagining leadership. And I think those are sort of two really important characteristics around resilience and adaptability. Yeah. And I have to say, another key feature of transformational leadership, as we know, is collaboration, right? And I feel like the world is heading in the direction where we need to be collaborating more. Yes. If we are going to have stronger and more resilient health systems, for example, right? We need to be adaptable. I mean, think about COVID, right? Yes. And all the adapting you did that got you here. So, and to your point, those are sort of natural characteristics of women, because there's just this, and I think there's something about the resistance, again, from where I started, right? That has made women build resilience. Because if I'm being completely honest, for a lot of women leaders, and trust me, I have sat with women leaders from Europe to the Americas to Africa. It's unfortunate, but they have the same issues in varying degrees, but the same issues. Some man thinks that you should not be leading. They don't think you should. Jacinda Ardern, while she was Prime Minister of New Zealand, was asked, are you planning to have babies? Because, it might affect the country if you go on maternity. Like, that was somebody's problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. So they're up against so many challenges that I feel like resilience must be in your toolkit, right? Do you know what I mean? And then this ability to adapt. And I think back to the body sort of metaphor, our health system is like so vital, right? And women often tend to be at this heart of the heart, right? Heart of the matter. And for many women, they just have it in them, this ability to adapt and to be resilient on the individual level. And I think it's really interesting how that sort of mirrors what they're able to do in health systems. Because one thing that we know that women do really well and was exemplified during COVID is this ability to stretch, right? And this ability to be resilient and to adapt. And I think that really summarizes what happened during COVID, where women were quick to adapt and were able to build resilience within their health systems, and it led to better health outcomes.
I agree. And I think I love the statement, right? When women lead, better health follows.
That's right.
So my last question to you is a question that we ask pretty much all of our guests.
Okay.
It's the 111. What is the one book that you read at some point that you say, if I had a time machine, I would go back in time and take this book with me?
Yeah.
What is the one personal value that you will not compromise no matter the cost?
Right.
And what is the one habit that you maybe started later in life that you wish you had started earlier? So
wow.
one book, one habit, one personal value.
I love it. One book. It's a book called Traveler's Gift. I love it. It's a beautiful book. And I've given it to a lot of people that I care about. And you know, to date, I don't really, because it tells stories of like Anne Frank and this, but there's something so beautiful about that book that I love. So it's The Traveler's Gift. It's a beautiful book. And then what is the next
Habit?
one? The one habit that I learned later in life, I definitely think it'll be journaling. Journaling has changed my life because it's that self-talk, right? I actually have it all in my head. I do it on a regular, but I think writing it down was really transformational because then I could look back at what I had written.
You have a tool for reflection. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I could sort of reflect on how was I feeling at the moment? What was going on at the moment? So journaling. So I'm encouraging my three kids to journal, but my 8-year-old, I think, is more adept. She's going to be 9, and then my 7-year-old twins are looking at me like, what are you talking about? But journaling for sure. And then what's the one more thing?
Personal value that you will not compromise. Yeah.
So I don't know so my faith is a huge part of my life. This is my entire life story, right? So in terms of personal value, I would say, to be honest, let me narrow it down to sort of like love around how you treat other people. You know, because the Bible says treat others how you treat your
the golden rule, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The golden rule. I think that's because when everything else fails, I think that love never fails.
Love never fails.
Yeah.
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 Wow. Thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation with me. You have inspired me. You've given me a lot to think about. And I'm sure the audience feels the same way. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you so much, Ben, for having me. This was great. I enjoyed the conversation as well.
And to our dear listener and those who are watching, this has been the Why Lead podcast. And I'm your host, Ben Owden.